Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers in VMware, and I'm joined today with Girish. Welcome, Girish. Why don't you just introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Guy, for your time today. Hi, everyone. This is Girish Manmarkar. I'm part of a VMware Cloud Provider program focusing on VMware Cloud Foundation and the features specific to the provider community globally.
Thanks, Girish. And there were some big announcements around Cloud Foundation 5.0 Explore in Las Vegas a few weeks back. And obviously our service providers utilize Cloud Foundation or some components of Cloud Foundation, often with Cloud Director sitting on top, and it really provides some unique capabilities and opportunities for service providers. And go forward, I think it is a real strategy for VMware to kind of double down into the Cloud Foundation offering. So Girish, let's just start with just a recap then. I know we're going to talk about your blog that you've just written around Cloud Foundation and scalability and efficiency, but let's just have a recap for everyone. What is VMware Cloud Foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it really makes sense to start with the basics of VMware Cloud Foundation. So essentially, VMware Cloud Foundation is based off of key components of VMware products. vSphere, everyone is fully aware of from last more than 25 years, that has been consumed very well across globe. Now then we have networking. Networking, again, it's virtualized networking in terms of NSX and vCenter server to manage the overall infrastructure that everyone is fully aware of. And then we introduced vSAN, many years ago. As a part of that, a lot of customers have been doing deployments of vSAN manually, vSphere manually, and trying to make sure that what they have done is architecturally accurate, yes or no, and always have had those doubts. So a few years ago, about 8 years ago, VMware came back and say, hey, you know what? I think we have so many good products. We have a lot of best practices. Let us talk about a validated design or a solution. So we came up with VVD, VMware Validated Design, which was a documented guidance. And then we did an automation of VVD in terms of right deployment based on right architecture across all these products, so that you as a customer, you as a provider, don't really have to think through, is it well architected? Is it right configured across all the components of my stack? When you talk about software-defined data center, it's all done for you based on automation delivered by VMware Cloud Foundation. It is just not only the bring up process of building the stack. Anyone can do it with homegrown, coding, maybe an Ansible or Terraform and things like that. But the beauty of Cloud Foundation is to make sure that what happens to the day two. And that's what it is delivered by SDDC Manager. SDDC Manager is fully aware of all your infrastructure components, how they are deployed, and how they need to be updated or patched. And that's the beauty of VMware Cloud Foundation. And it kind of gives you an ability to really provide different workload domains or clusters. If I am a provider, I have an ability to have my management components here centralized, but customers can have the entire compute and storage for themselves. So I can give them a dedicated experience of delivering a domain per customer. In this picture, you see tenant A and tenant B. So they are basically separate, dedicated servers allocated to them for their own usage. They have no clue of what tenant B is, or if there is any tenant B exists, and vice versa. So there is a delineation and isolation of customer workloads, which gives me as a provider an ability to manage and perform the day-to operations as per the customer's requirement or as per my ability to perform those day-to operations very, very seamlessly. So in short, this is Cloud Foundation.
Okay, it's quite a lot to it. So let's just peel back the onion a little bit. So Cloud Foundation is a hyper-converged software solution which delivers in accordance to a VMware validated design, VVD,
Yep.
all of the components necessary for really what is private cloud. So you got networking, compute, security, and then what we're saying in addition to that is you can actually split up the management domain of the VCF private cloud and set up separate domains of compute and storage and networking for each tenant that you require. And how is this different from Cloud Director then? What does Cloud Director offer, which is different to kind of VCF?
So I have not specifically written in this blog, but what happens onto this particular environment? This is purely infrastructure as a service. So you are deploying the infrastructure. Cloud Director can be deployed on top of it. And if you have a tenant A and tenant A says that, hey, I have a couple of other departments and I want to make sure that I have that multi-tenancy within my domains. So Cloud Director will sit on top and then basically carve out the compute storage in terms of the resource pool from the cluster as per their need and deliver it to their accounts department or their HR department or their sales department, like that. So Cloud Director brings further level of isolation and multi-tenancy from an end user experience perspective.
And of course, all the applications and everything else that's involved in Cloud Director, marketplace, object storage, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, so when we're talking about then these domains per customer, are we talking about physical hosts assigned to tenants and then the domains being carved up by physical hosts? Are we still talking about virtualized resources, not resource pools like Cloud Director, but how is that kind of domain isolation achieved?
Yeah, so I think let me just see if I can do an annotation here, right? So perfect. So very good question, right? I think each customer will get their dedicated physical ESXi host when they create a workload domain, right? So if you look back, and this is changing, this isolated workload domain is changing the definition of how a provider can leverage VMware Cloud Foundation. Until now, I have seen a lot of providers essentially deploying a consolidated architecture per customer. What it means is that they'll deploy with minimum 4 node per customer. They will have management components and the workload components within this same 4 hosts. That was my consolidated architecture. So there was a lot of providers that I've seen that they were having each customer 1, customer 2, customer 3, customer 4, everyone will get a dedicated private cloud, but everyone will have the consolidated architecture, which means if I have 20 customers, I will have to manage and maintain 20 SDDC manager. So what I call that as a VCF sprawl, right? And it was a day-to nightmare from managing it. It was tough. So this architecture is changing and making it more day-to friendly from a provider perspective. Rather than maintaining 20 SDDC managers, can I just have one SDDC manager and then manage this 20 odd provider, 20 odd customers easily? Well, that brings me an efficiency. That brings an efficiency for my tenant or for my customer. They get full capacity of this 4 hosts or 3 hosts minimum that they can start with and grow by adding host by host. Their management components are running here. So it's a minuscule part of management that I can pay as a customer rather than putting everything into my own workload domain. So it gives them more compute, more storage for the actual business workloads. And for provider, there is an efficiency in terms of the operations that they have to manage fewer SDDC managers. And we'll talk about the new scalability limits as we move forward.
Okay, so in this scenario, then, where you're able to scale out tenant domains at a host-based level, and you're able to have one centralized management domain, do tenants get access to that centralized vCenter that's in charge of their domain, or would that have to then be kind of a managed service type option?
Uh, very well, very good question, actually, because as a provider, I have multiple options. I can manage everything as a
Mm-hmm.
provider, so customer doesn't need to have an access to vCenter server. What they will get is basically an ability to deploy all the VMs for their businesses. And they say, you know what? I don't really care where it is running, how it is running, as long as I have my performance met from an networking perspective, from operating system perspective, from storage perspective, I'm good. So it's more like a provider managed type of scenario where
Mm-hmm.
I, as a provider, I manage everything. So I don't need to give any access of my management components to my customer here, right? So
Yeah.
that's option one. Now, there is option number two. Customer comes and say, hey, actually, provider, uh, I need a fully dedicated environment, but I would like to manage myself at the tenant level. You still manage from the data perspective. So, like for
Yeah.
example, creating various NSX specific, uh, topologies and defining various DFW rules and things like that. That's where I can provide them NSX level access, maybe a admin access or admin minus one access. So I want to make sure that when I'm performing an upgrade, I have that control. I don't want them to perform the LCM functions of the entire stack. To keep the health of the stack, I will give them the access, maybe a little bit of reduced admin access, so that they can manage and maintain NSX or even vCenter server. So I can define those various rule role-based access for a given for a given customer, and they would be happy to do that. So I still keep LCM function. I still keep the consistency of my stack for a provider, but I can hand off reduce admin level access to them, right? Then the option number three, me as a provider, customer comes and say, hey, I need to have everything and I need to have full control. Okay. So what I do essentially through my portal or through my mechanism, I can say, okay, what do you want? Customer says, I need 4 hosts for my workload, and then I need another 4 hosts for another workload. So I need 2 workload domains. And then I say, okay, then I have to have another 4 node minimum to start my management. So it becomes 4 into 4 into 4. So it's about 12 hosts. And customers say, okay, but I want to manage everything, including LCM, day-to operations. That's fine. So what I do essentially, I perform the bring up process and then hand off keys to them. So they have full control to management and they can deploy the way that they want everything. I do not have even admin level access within the customer's environment. I just provide them the bare metal servers, perform the bring up, and
Yeah.
provide the licenses that if they want, and I'm done. So they manage everything. So it's more like a customer managed type of environment. And there are scenarios as well, and providers also delivering this service without having any issues with it. But customer
Okay.
is responsible to maintain the hygiene and maintain the goodness of automation, LCM, everything, top to bottom, since they wanted the keys to the kingdom, and they're the king now.
Yeah. So I can see how this could work from a fully managed scenario where the provider does everything, including the spin up of VMs, firewall rules, everything else. And
Yeah,
therefore, then you can have your domains per customer, etc. That's kind of what we see on screen now is a good representation of that. Um, the other flip side of it is basically a private cloud as a service where like you say, we'll manage up to the hardware layer. You go off and do anything you want, Mr. Customer. Um, And that may be of value for some larger enterprise customers who've got a lot of skills in-house to kind of manage the entire VCF domain. But for most customers, it's going to be that middle ground where they want to spin up VMs, VApps. They want to do their own firewall rules, and that's, a bit of networking, bit of storage policies, basic stuff. And that's where it's almost, and I don't quite know what the difference is, and perhaps you could explain it, but it sounds to me like it's a shared vCenter environment realistically, where the management domain includes vCenter, and you're going to limit the access and the role-based permissions that each customer has.
Yeah. And also, I think the first option that I talked about is like a provider managed, right?
Yeah.
Allows a lot of providers to go after a small customers, where sometimes there's even 4 node for the workload, or the 4 node here for the workload are heavier, because nowadays these hosts are very bulky in terms of the CPU, memory, and storage. They are pretty heavy. So customer says, hey, I'm not going to grow, so I'm okay with 3 hosts, right? So it gives me as a provider to start low for those customers. So the customer that I was turning down in the past because I cannot go below 4 nodes minimum, now I can, because it is an isolated workload domain type of environment. It is a standard architecture of VCF, allows me to manage for customer all the day 2 functions, including bring up process. And then I can say, customer, let us start with minimum 3 hosts, and then add host by host as you grow. So it's more like going after those small customer becomes feasible now. Feasible in terms of the CapEx, and OpEx benefits are there anyway. So you don't have to turn down the customer. I was talking to one of the provider a few months ago. They say, hey, actually, you know what? We did not know that we can do this now. So the sellers were very, very happy. So now they're going to go after all these small to medium type of customers, so that we can land and then expand. Gives them a very good option to not to lose those kind of customers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, 3 physical hosts may be still too big for a lot of provider kind of customer base, but it seems to me that if you're looking at SME type customers and particularly enterprises, then this presents a really good option. So.
Right.
From this is new, this domain per customer capability and the 3 node workload domains, is that a new feature of VCF5?
No, it is not specific to VCF5. It has been there, but the consumption of VCF largely within the provider community has been a consolidated architecture that I explained earlier, right?
Yeah.
Now, what we recommend to the provider that, hey, look at the standard architecture. Now, what is happening? Let me just go a little bit down here and talk about what the isolated workload domain is doing, right? So it's a standard architecture, but isolated workload domain. So until now, until 5.0, all these virtual center servers that you see here being deployed per domain were in a linked mode, right? Which means that SSO domain was same. So once you define SSO domain, it's the same SSO domain that it will inherit at the vCenter server, right?
Yeah.
So if I have a customer A or customer B, they will fall into the same SSO domain. Now, with isolated workload domain, what we have done, or what VCF team has done, is giving an ability to create a separate SSO domain, right? Single sign-on domain, while creating or while deploying a workload domain. So in this scenario, with this feature, what happens is that your vCenter SSOs are no longer in enhanced link mode, right? That gives an ability for me as a provider to scale beyond earlier 15 workload domain, which was a limitation because of the link mode or ELM mode.
Yeah.
That is gone. So I can scale up to 24 workload domains and 1,000 hosts per VCF instance. So this is a large scalability enhancements for the provider, right? Also,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
numbers are basically tested by the engineering team. That's where those numbers are. If you, as a provider, wants to go beyond 24 workload domains or beyond 1,000 hosts, do let us know. We will make sure that the engineering will have a look and will bless it to your design requirements as well. So there is not limitation, but it becomes easier to scale, but still manage efficiently. If it is too big, becomes too tough to manage. So we want to make sure that we address scalability in terms of manageability from the day two perspective. If you have 100 workload domains and just one management domain, again, day two will become a little bit challenging. So we want to make sure that we give the scalability, but also efficiency in terms of day two operations. So I think this is like, giving you an ability to really deliver what you're looking for. So you can have here a customer as depicted here in the blue with vSphere.local, so I can deploy my management, and then I can have my workload.local as a different SSO domain for customer one. I can have customer 2.local, customer 3.local, and their workloads are running on a different network altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
total separation in terms of the workload at the moment. What we are also enhancing, the management is still on the same uh, port group back network. We are working on enabling that network level isolation in upcoming release, and we will talk about it when we release the product. But for customers' point of view, customers' workload, vSAN or vMotion or VM traffic is all now on their own separate network itself.
Okay. So yeah, you've got the physical separation of the customer domain by the host level, and then you've also got the network separation and the SSO separation as well.
Exactly.
So there seems to me to be plenty of scalability here. 24 domains could be 24 different customers and up to 1,000 hosts across the whole 24 customers. That's a huge amount of scalability. So really, I mean, I think providers who have that VCF sprawl today, is there an option for them if they are doing this as a fully managed service? So each VCF instance is managed and run and executed, even the customer tasks by them. Then realistically, they could create a new VCF5 management and workload domain, and then pull in those existing customer workload domains into that, so they can then take advantage of this segregation. Would that be something that's available for brownfield?
If they are running VCF4, it becomes easy to upgrade from VCF4 to VCF5. It's easily doable. But what a lot of customers, what a lot of providers are doing essentially is that uh, how they sell the service. Sometimes that I've seen that they sell hardware, software together in a contractual fashion, like for 3 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they
Yeah.
got those type of opportunities and say, hey, customer, you're up for renewal. So I'm going to move your workloads to a newer environment with the newer servers and everything is brand new. So the workload migration happens to the newer environment and then they phase out the older hardware, right?
Okay.
So
Mm.
hardware refresh is one trigger. So provider will deploy VCF5, create a workload domain if customers consuming probably 10 hosts. They'll look at how much it's consumed, what the capacity is, and then they might just say, hey, these are the newer servers, have more power, more capacity. I'm just going to go consolidate this number of servers into maybe 6 or 8 or 7, depending on the
Yeah.
size of physical hardware, and then migrate the workloads. Again, migrating workloads, there are various options. We have what we call as VMware HCX. We have VCDA now. The newer release allows me to migrate vCenter specific workloads as well. If I am consuming VCDA as a provider, VCDA is the best option for me to migrate customer workloads.
Yeah.
Otherwise, VMware HCX is another option that you can do a live migration as well. So a lot
Got
of
it.
options are
Yeah.
opened up with this architecture uh, for a lot of providers and customers as well.
Yeah. For me, I think the technically there seems to be, a really good fit here in terms of the isolation. For me, I think the challenge is going to be around the type of service that they're providing today, or intending to provide tomorrow with this new this new architecture. Because I think we all know that it's quite a challenge to maintain all of the discrete user permissions, and keep segregation managed in a shared vCenter environment. And that could present a challenge in how they offer their service. In the two opposite ends of the spectrum, one in the fully managed, it's fine, the provider manages everything, the customer has only access to their workloads. In the customer managed, that's fine because the customer has access to their own management domain.
Yeah.
But in that middle ground, we're in the shared vCenter type environment. And I think in that respect, that's an environment where could you leverage, because I know a lot of providers have moved from shared vCenter to Cloud Director specifically to work around that challenge and to provide a much more operationally efficient environment. Could we leverage Cloud Director on top of VCF? And I know that's a model that is possible, but using that single management domain vCenter.
Yeah, I think what happens is that customers sometimes are used to the access to the vCenter server. But when we say, hey, we will not lose any of your capabilities, we will manage it, and we will just have Cloud Director on top of it and give them the access of the admin of their own workload domains the way they want it. And that's doable as well. So that also helps them to keep customer satisfied so that customer can do and manage the things that they were managing it through vCenter. But now putting VCD on top, they can still manage the specific task that they were looking for. So it's a win-win for both, actually. So VCD brings a lot of efficiency as well in terms of giving what the customer is looking for from an access perspective, manage their own environment. And for provider is to basically make it more simple and not to have to manage all those role-based access to the provider's admins.
Yeah, I see a lot of value in that respect. I'm struggling to see how. So in the VCF, deployment, you've got things like SCDC Manager, you've got NSXT, you've got vSAN, vCenter. So you can put VCD on top of that. VCD obviously has its own demands in terms of NSXT, advanced load balancer. I think those are kind of the two major ones. But then essentially you wouldn't need those custom isolated workload domains unless there was a customer that wanted physical isolation, because you can now do the isolation with VCD. So actually you get a really good model in that you get the ability to deliver dedicated kind of private cloud, but whilst maintaining that operational consistency with VCD. And you're doing, like the isolation at the host level and at the networking level. Or you can do a shared private cloud environment where you're giving them access to the resources, but it's in one workload domain as far as VCF is concerned. Like a public cloud scenario, sorry, not a private cloud. And then obviously you could do your dedicated VCF where vCenter effectively is VCD is a pass through into that VCF dedicated management domain for specific customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would VC, just out of interest, if a partner did a kind of that shared model, would they then be able to use the NSX instances with VCF, or would they have to deploy their own still? And it's maybe a technical question, I'm not sure, but I'm just looking to see if there's any deduplication of software that we can kind of do here with Cloud Director?
Cloud Director will, leverage the underlying NSX per workload domains, because in
Okay.
Cloud Director, we will have vCenter server as my endpoint, and each workload domain comes with their own vCenter server and NSX managers, and those will be leveraged by the VCD actually on top. It becomes more, abstracted layer actually for a customer.
Yeah, that's really nice. That's really nice. Yeah, of course, you can add your NSX team managers when you go through the provisioning in Cloud Director. And there are some, pretty big partners who are doing this successfully at the moment. And I think there's like you indicated at the beginning, right? There's a lot of benefit with using VCF. You have the whole kind of SDDC manager. And then if you use Cloud Director on top, you can plug in Lifecycle Manager as well on top of that. Cloud Provider Lifecycle Manager, sorry, to support the additional cloud provider components. So in its totality, you've got a really nice model to be able to simply scale out your underlying compute and simply manage isolation for different customer requirements and different customer cloud requirements. Whilst, potentially if you're using VCD, maintaining that operational excellence that VCD brings you.
Yep, absolutely. I think just wanted to touch upon one point here. As I said here, that the management is still shared, right? So what our recommendation is basically to really, provide some sort of, DFW rules to secure the traffic between customer workloads and their respective management components. And, we will cover in depth as we release network separation as well as the management. But until then, you are still in a, position to leverage VCF 5 for the tenant workload separation. Just to recap in terms of the key advantages, right? It's a scalable architecture, as I talked about it, 24 workload domains up to 1,000 hosts, optimizing CapEx by consolidating architecture or infrastructure as a provider. It gives a way to easily onboard the customer. Maybe a customer running 10 large VMs or 100 small VMs, to start with 3 hosts, land and expand. And then basically it's all about time to market, right? We want to make sure that as a provider, you are able to create that workload domain for a customer in few minutes rather than weeks, right? Otherwise, customer will go somewhere else, and we don't want that. So it's much more simple, straightforward. As long as you have the capacity in your data center, how your business model is, you can create a workload domain, hand off keys to the customer, and you're fine, right? Also, it allows you to reduce the VCF instance sprawl, as I talked about it earlier, right? Yep. Rather than having consolidated architecture, each customer will have their own SDDC manager and things like that. Instead of that, now with the standard architecture, with isolated workload domain, you can think about reducing that VCF sprawl, increasing the efficiency for you as a provider from an operations perspective. Rather than managing multiple VCF instances, you can manage fewer VCF instances. And again, upgrade patching gives you a lot of flexibility as well. VCF 5 especially gives you a lot of simultaneous parallel upgrade and patching activities actually. So that's another key feature that you can think of, leveraging it for your customers. And again, without enhanced link mode, that's another great way for you to say customer very confidently that there is a separation right from server level to the various traffic for the workload that they can do.
Cool. So I think this makes a really powerful solution for cloud providers to at least look at, particularly if you're providing VCF today and you're familiar with the components. The blog is below, so have a look at the blog itself, Girish. You mastered that blog, and we got more blogs coming by the looks of things, which is really good to see. And there's also a bunch of other kind of capabilities and value propositions with some of the components in VCF, like vSAN disaggregated storage and stuff, which are really kind of front of providers' minds at the moment. So it's a great time to start looking at this architecture. If you've got VCD, it's still a great time to look at this architecture as well. Like I said, there's some pretty successful partners out there doing large deployments of VCF, I'm going to call them pods, but management, single management domain, multiple isolated domains of customers in what they call pods. Thanks, Girish. Any final words for folks out there watching?
I think, VCF 5, we listen to you as a provider. This was long pending request with VCF PM team, and they have really delivered it, and they are delivering it further, enhancing, keeping in mind as a provider use case, and kind of, delivering isolation, scalability, performance. Also, we are kind of coming up with, GPU enhancement as well, and we will talk into the next blog a little bit more detail, and we will cover VCF specific feature set actually, and how they are applicable for a provider to drive their business more efficiently. That we will talk in the next blog as well.
Brilliant. Girish, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate it.